I'm not even sure if this is possible. Like from a technology perspective, from a regulatory perspective, like is this going to work? Like I'm not sure. 3 years ago when we first started working on this as a concept, the technology wasn't there. You know, we were able to take the structure that we worked on at the big banks and combine that with new tech to really create something that is really different and really helps to solve that problem. We're the first to ever tokenize a house in the UK. Like that is something that will stick with us forever. You know, a company that's ultimately going to get to a unicorn status. And I think that's quite overwhelming.
Welcome to the Bay HQ, where we inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians. Smash that subscribe button if you watch us on YouTube, and leave us a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Today we have with us Matt Ong, who's the founder and CEO of Ctrl Alt. They're an easy way to invest in alternative assets. How are you doing today?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Excited to be on the podcast.
So people watching this right now might be a little bit confused. And when I met you myself, I didn't quite realise either, right? Because obviously this is the British Asian podcast and you've got Asian heritage, but you've had this interesting dynamic you were talking about before where people sometimes don't realise that. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's something that's I've kind of had to deal with my whole life. But yeah, I'm half Chinese, half English/Irish, so I might not look like the obvious candidate for a British Asian entrepreneur podcast or events. But yeah, I mean, even coming to the launch event with you guys, is something that I've been quite self-conscious about. You know, are people going to turn up at the event and think, who's this guy? He doesn't look like he's a British Asian entrepreneur at all. And so, yeah, I think it's just something that I've battled with in terms of like cultural identity for most of my life. And it's probably only really now where I'm, I guess, more comfortable to try and embrace both sides of that and be comfortable in that. I think, you know, as you'll probably know and have experienced growing up in the UK, you often find yourself gravitating more towards trying to fit into cultural norms. And so I think I found that a lot of the time I naturally gravitated that way, and I could kind of go that way as well because I looked at that certain way. But there was definitely, I guess, a part of me missing, like a big part of my culture that I was kind of putting to one side and ignoring. So, you know, certainly as I've gotten a little bit older, it's a part of me that I want to embrace a little bit more. And yeah, that's why kind of coming on here and coming to your events and trying to get involved is high on my priority list.
And you mentioned before as well how when you went to university as well, where you almost felt like you couldn't go to those events, even though, like you said, it is a part of your culture growing up, and you said your dad is like very Asian stuff still. So you still have that family background of knowing the cultural norms and everything there, but you felt like you couldn't express that outside of the home.
Yeah, I think it's quite easy to, you know, see one person, but behind the scenes not really understand the true story. I had quite an Asian upbringing. You know, there was no roast dinner complete without rice. It was like that kind of fusion of worlds that I grew up in. So I definitely had both. But, you know, after going to a very diverse school, I went to university, and, you know, there are societies that are, you know, for, you know, East Asian or Asian societies, but I never felt like I would be able to go to them. I always felt like I'd be judged if I was to go to them. And obviously, I don't think that would have been the case. Everyone is so inclusive, and everyone, you know, puts that message out, you know, it's open to everyone. But then you look at the photos of like society events and things like that, and it's all people that look the same. And then you kind of think, well, if I was to go, I wouldn't look like that. Would I stand out? So I think it was just something that I've also been, I've been very self-conscious of. But yeah, I've seen videos of people that are also, you know, mixed heritage like myself, and they're kind of share the same story. And I think it's also important for mixed people to get representation in both sides as well, because we often feel like we don't fit on either side of that equation.
It's something I think, even with, say, British Asians, right? I was once told by somebody who literally told me, you're never going to be happy because you consider yourself English, because you're not, like, you don't look like an English person. So even, say, people who are like from one ethnic background, right? Then they feel like they've got this like tear between being born and raised in Britain, but also having a different heritage. And you've got that to another layer of that, right? And it's difficult, right? And I think it's something which it's good that people are now talking about it. Like, how did that affect your confidence growing up, right? Did you think, could you look at anybody from any background, be like, I could be like that one day? Or how did you feel about, like, what was your role models like?
Do you know, it's really interesting you making that point about like your cultural heritage versus, I guess, your ethnic heritage as well. And, you know, I've spoken to quite a few other people from, you know, ethnic minority backgrounds, and they've kind of said that, you know, culturally they feel very British, right? They grew up here, but, you know, they go and see family that live overseas, and they kind of get judged a little bit, and they kind of are viewed in a different light because they are so culturally British. And I think that's why we definitely kind of feel that sense of community amongst, British Asians. And I think it's also so important and distinguish between that. I think growing up, I mean, it was always something that I was quite self-conscious about, again, because like you're in school and even like the food that you eat, like it's a common, I guess, story, but it's something that's also very relevant to me as well. Like I would always prefer to have a stir fry and rice rather than like a sandwich. It sounds very stereotypical, but like, that's how I'm geared. That's part of how I was brought up. But, you go around to a friend's house and it's, something a little bit different. So yeah, I think like your cultural identity when you're growing up particularly kind of gets suppressed a little bit because you are finding that need to fit in, that you don't want to be picked on, you don't want anything like that, and you kind of find yourself going in that direction. And I think that's a massive shame. I think we should be encouraged to embrace that side of you. And I think for me, I kind of just went the easier route in many ways. I was like, I kind of looked a certain way, and so it was easy for me to do that. But I think that was a massive shame, and it's only now I'm older that I'm kind of appreciating that.
And then your choices in like in your early career as well, right? Because you went into the investment banking world, the general banking world. Was that coloured at all by this upbringing, or?
I guess again, maybe playing to the stereotypes. I was always good at maths, and I was always good at that kind of finance, and that was always where I wanted to go. So I knew that I wanted to play in the financial industry, and so from very young had kind of had that in mind. So then went on to work at Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse in the investment banking space, and it was great. But again, I guess talking about like as we mentioned before, who was around you in those worlds, and they aren't the most diverse environments either. And even like from a background perspective, like a lot of people came from Oxford and Cambridge and very prestigious schools. I didn't have that, so I had a very much more untraditional entry into that world. And then when you're there, it's not, again, the most diverse world. So obviously the banks are trying to do a lot around diversity and trying to change that. But when you look at your management, a lot of it is dominated by, by the same figures.
And when you're at these banks as well, so obviously you then went on to found Ctrl Alt. But what was that journey like? Where did the idea come from? What was behind that?
So I think I'd always wanted to do my own thing. I've always kind of had that entrepreneurial side of me as well. Partly maybe because of my upbringing. I started a mobile phone business when I was like 13 to try and fund my own mobile phone. I started affiliate marketing before it was popular. As I kind of went through banking, kind of was a little bit frustrated with the corporate world. Everything was based on your years of service rather than, your performance. And I felt like I had that entrepreneurial itch to scratch as well. And I guess just the space that I was in the alternatives asset space at the banks. And
for people who didn't understand what that is, what is alternative assets?
Yeah, it's a good question. So alternatives are anything apart from, stocks, bonds, and probably put cryptocurrencies in there. It's like this world of assets like property, like infrastructure, like venture capital, for example. These are all alternative asset classes that people don't really have access to. And, I spent a lot of my career particularly focused on hedge funds as an alternative asset class and structuring products to allow people to access hedge funds. But again, it was typically only the super rich. And so there was obviously that side of you that's like you're helping the rich getting richer. And there was a frustration that access to alternatives, even, very familiar ones like property, has been quite limited. You think about who can actually invest in property, and it's again the super rich. And I think that was the frustration. And we were able to take the structure that we'd worked on at the big banks and combine that with new tech to really create something that is really different and really helps to solve that problem.
And where did the ideas come from? Like, how did you even think about this?
It was personal, right? So when I looked at what I would want to put my money into, I'm maybe more risk averse in many ways, despite being a founder. But cryptocurrencies weren't really for me. And as a banker, I wasn't actually allowed really to trade public markets either. So I looked at property. But I'd maybe be able to buy one property. Even then, it'd be really difficult, long process, and I'd be exposed to that one property. I wouldn't be able to diversify. So the investment guy in my mind was like, it's not it's not a great investment. If something happens to this property, then you're completely out. And the ability to build a portfolio in property or other alternatives was just not there. And then as you start digging in, you see there are really interesting alternative asset classes that have fantastic returns that you just never would be able to access. Property that can yield you 14-15%, but most people don't realize that that's even an option, because for most people it isn't. So it was born out of our own frustration. We wanted to access some of these assets, we couldn't, and then there was nothing really out there in the market that solved that problem either.
And obviously, a lot of people have this frustration, but not everybody does something about it. So what was that first step of, okay, we're frustrated by this problem. How do you go about okay, now we're going to do something about it? What was those first steps you took?
It was more, it was like, there's a clear problem here. We looked at what was out there. There wasn't anything. There was maybe property crowdfunding platforms. They're really expensive. And we thought, would we use these platforms? And the simple answer to that was no. So we then started thinking about what would a platform look like that we would want to use. And the key things were, low fees. You can invest from your phone in a really simple way, and have access to great quality assets. So we kind of started from there. So the concept was all great, but as anyone in the fintech space knows, the main challenge in this world is around regulation. So doing things in a regulatory compliant way. This isn't your traditional startup where I've got an idea, I can then create an MVP and I can really run with it and chuck it out into the market and see what happens. No, you can't do that. You need to make sure you have the right controls in place before you actually go to market. So we spent a long time doing the underlying structuring work, and that's where my background is. So was able to lean quite heavily on my network and my own background to really create that product that is, suitable, that is regulatory compliant, that is legally sound as well. So we started kind of piecing it together. And as we were going through the motions, you kind of realize, actually, this isn't too dissimilar to what I've been doing for the last 7 years of my career. We're just kind of doing this in a new way, new technology. And it was an education process on, what's tokenization, what are digital assets, and how can we do that in the right way. So we started from like our core, what we knew, what we wanted to solve, and then it was then piecing together, what was going to enable us to do that.
And at this point, was it all on the side? So you're saying we as well, so you've got co-founders, right?
Yeah. So I started it with one of my co-founders from a concept, and we were very much doing it on the side. I think, again, because it's not that traditional startup where you can just dive into it and start trying to get some revenue on an MVP. There was 2 years where we were kind of building that framework, and we couldn't have done that if we'd have gone full time. So we were doing it on the side of our full-time jobs, which is challenging because investment banking is already a very demanding career and lifestyle. So there's a lot of sacrifice from me, and we kind of slowly built up our team from there. So we had more and more people kind of join us as we were kind of getting to that stage where we were ready to launch. So Elle and Jordan joined, still pre-product and very early doors. And so we kind of got to the place where we were comfortable, and then we were ready to really hit the market.
When you're 2 years as a side hustle where you haven't got any revenue yet, you haven't got any customers yet, was there any point like, what about if this all just doesn't work? Yeah. What do I do? Yeah,
100%. I mean, there were so many times where we were like, I'm not even sure if this is possible. Like from a technology perspective, from a regulatory perspective, like, is this going to work? Like, I'm not sure. And, even looking back at it, 3 years ago when we first started working on this as a concept, the technology wasn't there. When we look at like some of the third-party providers that we integrate, like they didn't exist 3 years ago. So we've been quite fortunate from a timing perspective, but absolutely, like it was like a daily battle being like, don't know if this is even possible. Like taking this from a concept to actually having something that works it felt like a big stretch, but we finally got there in the end.
And what kept you going when you had those doubts?
I think the people around me like kept me going. And I think, especially because, again, the nature of the business, like you create a legal structure, you send it off for like legal opinion, legal review, and then it comes back with like loads of like red marks all across it. And so it's like it's a real battle to like get things done. So having people around you that share your vision, that share your ambition, I think is really important. And that's kind of what kept me going. I think particularly when Jordan joined the business, who's my COO, that kind of gave me a new lease of life, because it meant that, having someone else that also backs you, that is willing to join full time. And that's kind of what kept me going. I think as well, when you've got people that are relying on you as well, people that are joining you, they back your vision, that increases the pressure and increases your focus, I think, as well.
And that was one of the other questions, is how did you get those people to join you? at those early stages where you were still having a full-time job yourself.
Yeah. Do you know, looking back on it, like we raised pre-seed while I was still working at Credit Suisse. And, you know, I remember like some of those conversations where they're like, so have you left your job yet? Have you not left your job yet? And it's like, no, I'm doing this in like a meeting room in my office. So it's definitely harder. And I think that's why I found like raising a seed round easier than doing pre-seed. It's a harder sell to people. It helps that I worked with Jordan at Morgan Stanley beforehand, but Elle, for example, you know, I met her on Y Combinator's startup school. You know, it's your job as a founder to sell the vision of your company. And so being able to attract talent, I think, is a good litmus test for that. Like, are you able to attract the best people? Because that's also going to be what you're going to have to do when you talk to investors as well. And so I think it's also important to find people that, you know, share your mission, that share your same kind of like mindset in what you want to do, because it's then a slightly easier sell. If I was talking to someone that, you know, didn't believe in alternative assets as an asset class, or, you know, trying to open up these asset classes and having a fairer way to invest, if people didn't see that, then they're not the right people. They're not going to get the vision. So finding those people is the first task. And then, you know, it's then up to you as a founder to do what you do best in many ways, which is sell your business.
The interesting thing as well, so what we're doing right now, right, with the Bay HQ, there's lots of people say, look, I'd love to help, right? But I feel the natural thing that many people want to help with the cool stuff.
Yeah.
How do you get people to help with the like pulling their sleeves up and getting in the dirty stuff that's not particularly interesting but needs to be done?
Yeah.
It also needs to be done by somebody who's trusted.
Yeah.
And how did you get people to do that kind of work? Because everyone wants to join the shiny object, but how do you get them to do the...
It's a really interesting question. I was actually having a conversation with some of the guys that I met at the launch event about the same topic. You know, when you're an early stage startup, what you're really looking for is for people that want to get their hands dirty, that are willing to do, you know, at an early stage, your roles merge, right? You have to be the master of none in many ways, but jack of all trades. And it's finding those people that are willing to do that. And it's hard. And I think, you know, there are certain stereotypes as to what those kind of people look like, whether they're like younger people that are more willing to do that. And I think in some cases that is maybe true, because, you know, people that have families and kids, they're less willing to take a risk on a startup, and therefore, you know, you don't get as much of an audience with that kind of demographic. But yeah, I think it's just really important to identify people that buy into what you're doing as a founder and trust you. Because if they trust you and they trust your vision, then they're going to be willing to get their hands dirty to do it. But if they're not sure about your capabilities of being able to do that, I think that then makes it difficult for them to be willing to put all of that time and effort into it.
And then you also mentioned about you raising your pre-seed while you're still working.
Yeah.
How did those conversations go? Because I can just imagine if I was going to invest in somebody and they said, oh, I've still got a day job, I'd pretty much...
Yeah.
It would pretty put me off quite heavily.
Yeah. And pre-seed was quite difficult. We didn't even have a website. So it was like purely selling the idea. But I think that is also the nature of pre-seed. And I think people get a little bit lost in pre-seed and seed, particularly now. Like pre-seed is very much your idea phase, right? But the expectations are quite high now of what you expect a pre-seed company to have. I think when I was raising, I was at the point where I was like, I'm just waiting for the FCA kind of approval to come through, and then, you know, I'm ready to go. And, you know, some of it was like midway through that process, so I'd not left my job yet, and then some of it I'd already like handed in my notice and I was kind of leaving. But yeah, it's difficult, and the conversation certainly got a little bit easier as we went along the line. But I think as long as you've got a valid reason for why you're doing it, and I think what they really liked was that, you know, being in a full-time job was what helped fund me to get to here, right? So I wouldn't be able to do all of that if I didn't have a job. So I think investors are also realistic, and it obviously depends on the individual's circumstance as well. And, you know, I wouldn't be able to do this, and we wouldn't have been able to have a platform if I wasn't supported by my full-time job.
And once you did go full-time, how did you feel? Because obviously you've been working for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then now you've finally got freedom. But I guess there's also quite a lot of pressure that comes with that too.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people don't realize that, right? It's like, it's great to now I can work in this full-time, but it's also like, I made a big decision. I need to back up that decision and deliver, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem I had was probably imposter syndrome. And it's something I still battle with, you know, very much today. But it's like, okay, I've quit this good job that I had in investment banking, and I'm now expected to be this founder that knows everything and lead teams and be able to execute a company that's ultimately going to get to a unicorn status. And I think that's quite overwhelming because, you know, I don't have experience in doing that. I'm a first-time founder. So I think that's quite a humbling experience. And I remember distinctly, I was the first one to move into the office because I quit my job first. I remember sitting in like a very small WeWork office just by myself and being like, this is very strange. I've gone from this loud trading floor to, you know, just me in this cupboard in WeWork, being expected to execute this vision. So it's a very strange process. Part of me was like, this is amazing. Like I finally, after 2 years, been able to get to do that. But then there's like a part of it that's also quite overwhelming. But I think looking back on that, what we didn't do well enough as a startup was kind of celebrate that kind of stuff. I remember thinking when I was in a job, the day that I get my own office, or like the day that we get our own office, is going to be amazing. Like that'll be so cool. Can you imagine having your own office? And that day came, and it was just it came and went. Like we didn't celebrate that. And we're moving office now, and I'm going to make sure that we make a big deal about that. And I think that's something that's important looking back on that as well.
How long ago was it now that you left your full-time job?
Almost exactly a year ago. I left in April 2022. So yeah, pretty much exactly a year ago.
So congratulations on 1 year as well. Celebrate that.
Yeah, do you know what? I didn't. That kind of just came and went. I think, again, like you just get caught up in how much there is to do in the startup world that you barely take a breath, right? So it's definitely something that we need to do better at. So yeah, thanks. But that's the first time I guess I've actually really realised that, yeah, I've passed the 1 year mark.
So I guess keeping on the theme of celebration then, so in that year, what's the progress you've made? What has Ctrl Alt done since?
I think the biggest achievement was actually tokenizing a house. So actually using that technology, combining that framework, and actually putting ownership of a house in the UK on blockchain again. And as I mentioned, we weren't sure if this was actually even possible. So after 2 years of work, to actually be able to execute this and it for actually to work, and work quite well, was like crazy, right? And that's such a massive achievement. I think we often underplay it internally. Like we're the first to ever tokenize a house in the UK. Like that is something that will stick with us forever. So that was a big deal for us. And then we launched publicly in the end of November of last year, just around the corner from where we're filming. And that was amazing. That was so much fun. We launched with a tiny house, which is like as the name suggests, a small house, right? We literally picked this house up and placed it in a venue in Shoreditch, closed off all the roads, had like a 14-foot lorry kind of craning it in, and just amazing, right? So like celebrating that kind of thing, and after all of that work, being able to put your business, your platform out there publicly is just amazing. So yeah, it was a big moment and a special moment for everyone.
One of the things I think quite interesting as well is that I've talked to obviously a lot of blockchain founders, right? And sometimes you hear them talk from the perspective of blockchain was the solution they wanted to use and they're going to find a problem for it. Whereas what you've done is opposite, right? You've got a problem and then you found out how tokenization can help that.
Yeah.
And for people who don't understand, and maybe including myself here, what exactly is that? If you could explain like in a minute or so, I guess, what the actual software does.
Yeah. So a blockchain is basically just a data source. It's like a record of ownership. And so, people often associate it with cryptocurrencies, which basically records who owns a particular token, which has a market determined value. We strip it right back and we use it for that, immutable source of truth, that ledger, that record of ownership. So think about how, if you issue shares in a company, you have your share register. We do the same thing, but the share register is just held on the blockchain. So the blockchain is essentially our record of exactly who owns shares in a particular asset. So that's what we do. That's what we use the technology for. It's a very kind of simple format, but when you think about the benefits that gives to us operationally, imagine if your shares, in your company are digital. It means you can trade them a lot more freely. You've got liquidity events. Operationally, it's a lot easier for you to manage it because, when you've got, hundreds of names on a share register, having all that digitalized, automatically updating makes that really easy. It helps to remove some of the layers of our legal structure as well. So it's a really powerful technology tool. But again, it's interesting you saying that. We started with what was the problem, and is there something that we can do to try and strip this back and make this easier, make it more accessible. And, at the time, tokenization was a concept that people had spoken about a lot. And, still to this day, people are like, real world assets being tokenized, i.e. ownership being put onto the blockchain, is the way forward, is what, blockchain's true value will look like. And there's been a lot of speculation about what that market size will look like. But the tools, the technology, the regulation all kind of needs to catch up a little bit. And we're kind of getting there now. So we're at a nice point where we're able to actually execute what we wanted to do.
Really glad to hear everything you just said, Dan. And you can just see how this decision to quit your job is now working out for you. But we're going to have to move on to quick fire questions now. And the first one, which I know you have to think about a bit, is who are 3 British Asians entrepreneurs that you'd love to shout out?
Yeah, maybe not a quick fire one, because this is one that I maybe have to think about a little bit. And particularly because of what we kind of discussed earlier with, not necessarily feeling part of this kind of community either. But, the people that I met at your event, a few weeks ago, they've been incredible in supporting me. So, Dhruvesh of Tuck, his platform is, rewarding people for, their e-commerce spends basically. And I think what he's doing is incredible, but, the support that he's given to me just in the last few weeks has been, even more incredible. Obviously Jay at Block Dojo, as someone in the blockchain space, seeing the support for early stage blockchain companies, but without the negative connotations as well, is really important. And so, big fan of what he's doing there. And the final will probably be you. I guess, you're kind of my gateway a little bit into this world as well. And you've made me feel so, welcome, which was something that I've always been like quite self-conscious of. And you were like, just come along. And I'm so glad I did, because again, I've met some incredible people, and yeah, hopefully I can also share my story with this community as well.
Thank you. I've never actually been shouted out before.
Really?
I didn't realize I was an option for people then. Now I'm in my head like, nobody else ever shouted me out. That's terrible.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. And, I'm glad that, because I met you at an event which was totally unrelated, and then we were just chatting for hours before even really realizing what each other did.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, like, oh wait, you did something really cool. Like, let's catch up. So now I'm a bit flustered and I'm blushing. But next question is, if people listen right now are like looking for help or guidance, what could you potentially help them with?
Yeah, I think the first step is like also not being afraid to ask for help. That's something that I've always kind of really struggled with. I think maybe like the Britishness in you, you kind of just plow away. I think if anyone's looking for advice on, how they've navigated from, pre-seed and seed, launching, talking to investors, particularly in the fintech space, I'm happy to help guide and kind of share some war stories of fundraising in quite a tough environment. So yeah, I think maybe that's the most value that I can add. I'm still quite early in my startup journey in many ways, but happy to kind of give my experience before that. And likewise, even what I've done beforehand in investment banking and my career beforehand, if people are interested in that world and, that versus the startup world, I'm happy to have discussions there as well, for sure.
So we didn't come on to this during the actual episode, but you're close to closing your seed round, right?
Yeah.
And what's that round of?
It's a 2.5 million seed round. So we are still very early stage. We're almost pre-revenue. So this is quite a large round. So again, it's about selling that story, and I think really excited about the investors and the VCs that we've got on board for this round. They really get what we're doing, and they can really see that potential. And I think that's why we've been able to raise in a harder environment. But yeah, by no easy feat, for sure. And
on the flip side, is it that you're looking for help with right now yourself?
I think the nature of our platform is we connect people that have assets. You could be a fund, you could be an investment manager, a property developer, with different distribution channels. That could be a fintech, a wealth manager, a private bank. And so, we're always looking to people that, they want to sell, alternative assets, or they have really interesting alternative assets that maybe we can help them get financing for. And likewise on the distribution channel, if you're a founder or, involved in a business that has customers that want to access this product, we'd love to chat as well. We're kind of helping to connect those dots. So yeah, if anyone sits on either side of that equation, we're all ears.
And thank you so much again for coming on. Really enjoyed this chat. Have you got any final words for the audience?
Final words. I think just sticking with it. I think it's a tough environment for everyone. The macro environment is quite challenging. But I wouldn't change my journey, and I definitely recommend people to just sticking it in and fighting for the ideas that they've worked hard for and what they think will be successful.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount to us, and we don't think you realise how important you are. Because if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you leave us a 5-star review, it makes a world of difference. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here, to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians, if you do those things, you can help us achieve that mission, and you can help us make a bigger impact. And by doing that, it means we can get bigger guests, we can host more events, we can do more for the community. So you can play a huge part. So thank you so much for supporting us.